My name is Mark Fleming. I'm the Senior Vice President for Business Development at WorldPay. WorldPay, everybody's familiar with WorldPay? No? A little bit? Show of hands? We awake after lunch? Okay, great. WorldPay is a global acquiring processor. We have a gateway solution and have recently made an acquisition that brought us full front into the alternatives space. My history, personally, has been in the PSP world, where I've always been an advocate for developing a robust alternative payment solution. And over the years, there's been stringy data from time to time, just because of the newness of the market, one, but also the relatively new products that came out in the marketplace. So it became very difficult to find some good qualitative data. And through our acquisition, we've come across some data and developed some data that I think is going to be very useful for everyone here today. Not only are we going to talk about individual payment methods, but also the geographies in which they are prevalent, as well as vertical market specific. So no more is this conversation going to be about, okay, if you offer alternative payment methods, you can increase your sales by 20%. Yeah, great story, and for the most part, rightly true. But let's get a little bit more granular today and look at the data from a vertical market standpoint, a geographical standpoint, and a product standpoint. Okay? So what I'll talk about today is the market in general. We'll look at the landscape with some stats around the landscape, what we think will be the future of alternatives and their role in e-commerce and m-commerce environment, and some stats on conversions and the potential uplift for conversions when looking at alternative payment methods. I'll then go into the specific payment types. We'll talk about the payment flow, how this works through the channel. We'll keep that fairly brief, and then go into some of the classifications that we've put these different alternative products into: e-wallets, direct debits, bank transfers, real-time bank transfers, etc. And then, if we have time, I want to touch on some more advanced topics around refunding of alternative payment products. If any of you, show of hands, who's got an e-commerce site right now where you're offering some alternative payment products on there, outside of cards and debit cards? Okay, so a few of you. And maybe you've experienced some of the challenges associated with potential fraud and refunding with those payment types as well. So we'll get into some of those. So the market, the landscape stats, long-term vision, and conversion stats, as I discussed. The market today, alternative payment methods globally account for approximately 165 billion of e-commerce transaction values. Almost 22% of e-commerce is now in the alternative space. And also for approximately 550 million of the payment revenues, 12% of the total in 2010. Within alternatives, a large variety of discrete schemes exist, approximately 230 globally. This is quite astounding to me. If you would ask the same question 2 or 3 years ago, I would challenge you to find half that number. So the idea around offering alternative payments is very much catching on in the marketplace. It is true, though, however, that the top 25 schemes globally do make up about 80% of the transaction value. The importance of having an alternative solution varies by geography. One of the things that I always was very hesitant to say was, okay, if you offer alternative payment methods, you are going to increase sales. That's not true, and I'll be the first one to tell you. You have to look at each market specifically, what payment methods are relevant within those geographies, within your particular vertical market, and make an educated decision with the help of an educated provider such as WorldPay. So the summary continued for alternative payments. Growth expectations. Alternative payments revenues are expected to continue to grow at a rate of approximately 13% compound annual growth rate to 2015. Again, further gaining market share in the e-commerce space. And the growth in alternatives usage will be primarily led by e-wallets, the PayPals of the world, the Alipays of the world, real-time payment methods, your online banking packages such as Ideal in the Netherlands, with some limited mobile impact. There's lots of talk around mobile space. I won't spend too much time on it today, just because although an up-and-coming, a new payment method is still really just a small percentage of actual e-commerce volume to date. And then we'll talk about differences by vertical. The prevalence of alternatives differs from a merchant vertical, with gaming and gambling, adult, video gaming, and digital content making up the vast majority of usage when it comes to alternative payments. And the penetration of alternative payments is expected to increase in most verticals. So regardless if you're not playing in one of those 4 verticals that are mentioned here, rest assured there are alternative payment schemes in particular geographies throughout the world that are absolutely going to be relevant to you and your business. So the prevalence of alternative payment methods varies by geography, as I mentioned. Again, overall, 22% of flow. If you look at the UK in particular, obviously a huge debit scheme here in the UK, with the alternatives mainly making up of PayPal and some other smaller schemes. Credit cards is also very popular, but if you look at countries such as Germany and the Netherlands, you can see here, try my laser pointer, yeah, you're talking about upwards of 60% of online e-commerce volume is being made up of alternative payment methods. The direct debit scheme, ELV, real-time banking packages. If you're going to do business in Germany, and I think everybody's quite aware of this by now, I've been saying it for years, you have to offer these products. If you don't, you're missing out on potentially 60% of the marketplace. Simple fact. If you look at the U.S., again, historically a very credit card-driven economy, but debit cards are making a huge push along with a lot of the alternatives, namely, again, PayPal on the e-wallet side. Prepaid cards also very popular in the U.S. And then in Asia Pacific, you have a wide variety. I don't like when they lump these types of regions together because if you go into Japan, you're going to have an entirely different scheme scenario as you will in China, in Thailand, Malaysia, etc. But as a whole, if you look at the region, you have a nice split between alternatives, debit, credit card mix. So within the alternatives, again, the top 25 approximately payment schemes make up 80% of the transaction volume. So the color yellow here designates those top 25 schemes. PayPal, massive for the e-wallet side. Alipay as well, with money bookers and some others bringing up the lower end of the percentile. Germany still, a lot of offline credit products. A lot of people are savvy enough to be shopping online, but insist on using an offline payment method, whether it be because of security, just something they're historically used to. Maybe they're trying to get rid of some checks that they found in a drawer from 1998. Who knows? But still a very large presence for offline payment products throughout Europe and in the U.S. and other geographies throughout the world as well. If you look at paper-based products, still very prevalent, especially in China and Germany for the retail space. COD is very hugely popular, along with checks, post office payments, specifically in China. These are all very relevant payment types when looking at these individual markets. Specific non-card payment types used vary significantly per geography. So again, we separated out China and Asia Pacific, as you can see here. But it's very difficult for me as an American. I speak to my American colleagues. I'm living here in London now, but I speak to my American colleagues about, okay, we want to go in Europe as a merchant. We want to go into Europe. Well, it's not quite that simple. And here is why. Okay, you have to look at each individual market separately. Although for credit cards, it's pretty easy. You have an intra-rate, an inter-regional rate. But in the schemes, within the individual alternative payment schemes, there's a wide variety throughout the majority of Europe and inclusive of the entire world. So again, looking at the individual markets, where you want to focus your business, and what relevant payment methods do you need to include in order to get the most market share you possibly can. Varying concentration and types of non-card payments per geography. Again, I'll skip right through this, but you can see the percentage of non-card total at the bottom. Nice data to have. So there's a long tail, as I mentioned. Look at all these schemes. Can you imagine trying to implement these on a global basis? Absolutely not. Again, I'll reiterate the fact that 25 of these top schemes do make up about 80% of the actual volume. But again, the details are the key. Where are you doing business? What is your vertical market? What payment products do I need to offer? Specific smaller schemes are needed for successful penetration into smaller markets. Brazil, boleto bancario, 40% of the market. This is an offline scheme with what happens to be a very low conversion rate. But if you don't offer it, you're automatically disqualifying yourself from that potential revenue. Finland, a number of real-time banking packages. Belgium, Mr. Cash, offline credit transfers. In Japan, Konbini and offline credits as well. Japan has a very unique system for offline bank transfers called a virtual bank transfer, whereby a merchant or a payment processor can buy a book of bank accounts, and each individual transaction will have a unique account number assigned to it. That's fantastic. It guarantees you a conversion on that individual transaction, and there's no matching should the consumer miss the reference number or screw up the amount, mess up their address, etc., have fat fingers, all the things that lead to confusion in the payment process. E-nets in Singapore, 50% of the volume. If you're only offering Visa and MasterCard, you're missing out on potentially 50% of the volume. So U.S. detail. Alternative the share of payment volume is forecasted to grow over the next 4 years, although be it marginally. The credit card is still the preferred payment method along with debit cards, but you can see some of the prepaid gift cards growing in terms of their market share, as well as some of the online alternatives, namely PayPal, Bill Me Later, other schemes that have made their way to the forefront in the U.S. market. But the key thing for here is most merchants are confirming that receiving more alternative payments. All right. So when they are offering the alternatives, they can see an increase year on year of the acceptance of that particular payment method, whether it be PayPal, Bill Me Later, whatever the case may be. So the penetration of alternative payment methods is expected to increase in most vertical markets. We're getting a little vertical specific here. Airline and travel, you can see a nice increase. Why? The large ticket value. The percentage fees associated with a credit card, for instance, and even some of the alternative schemes have led the people within the airline industry to get much more savvy in terms of how they present payment options and what payment options they present. Surcharging of credit cards has just been allowed in the U.S. and in many countries in Europe is allowed. They'll take advantage of those situations to push consumers towards lower cost, highly effective alternative payment methods. And the gaming and gambling space, if I may be so bold, the people that I've worked with in the gaming and gambling space are some of the most in-tune people that I've worked with in terms of payment options and working with alternative payment methods and making the consumer experience when it comes to the checkout process just about as good as it can get. Looking at different bin ranges and credit cards and is there going to be a problem with this particular bin, and then automatically offering a number of alternative payment methods, saving one, themselves money as organizations, and two, their consumers money, because much of those savings can be passed on to the consumer if the merchant so chooses to do so. In the adult space, we'll look for it to stay flat. The credit card rules in the recurring space and in the adult space as well. But there is a big push in the adult space for a lot of the e-wallets. Discretion is the key in a lot of cases when looking at the adult websites and the adult industry. But we do expect that to stay flat in terms of their usage of alternative payment methods. And the others will continue to grow, as you can see. Again, which payment methods? We'll get into that a little bit later. So alternative payment methods use varies by vertical based on the underlying payment needs. Again, I mentioned in the gambling adult space, the idea that the consumer can remain anonymous is a big pusher behind the use of e-wallets, which is one of the most popular payment methods for online gaming in the adult world. And also legal constraints that can be put on certain payment types, AML considerations, anti-money laundering. We've all heard of Black Friday that occurred with a lot of the gaming companies last year, whereby regulation prohibited these companies from functioning within certain areas of the world. And that also goes for certain payment methods. They've got a very close eye on them due to regulation. E-wallets and real-time banking for repeat visits and purchases. Real-time banking, some considerations there. We'll talk more about the potential for fraud in real-time banking, but there's some best practices that can be shared with regard to repeat visits. Is anybody using real-time banking packages at the present time? Nobody. In Netherlands using Ideal? No one? Is anybody doing business in the Netherlands? Okay. I highly suggest to look at Ideal. This is a fantastic scheme that's been very popular. However, you'll want to look at creating maybe a whitelist or something like this that you can see when repeat consumers come on to make that checkout process a little bit easier. We'll get into that a little bit more later. large online purchases for real-time online purchases, offline credit, PayPal for airlines and travel. Again, I talked about just the high transaction value and the need to optimize the fees and the revenues that an airline can make by getting away from those percentage-based payment methods and getting to more one-off transactional-based payment methods. In the government's education, utilities, insurance space, direct debits, very popular. Simple reason why. These are usually consistent amounts at a consistent time in a month, consistent time in the 3 months, quarterly, a year, whatever the case may be. So it's very easy to have a mandate signed for that initial transaction and this, have payment on payment on payment, pull the exact amount out, very common payment method, works very well. Merchants using alternatives rank importance of alternatives equal with card acquiring, fraud trailing only the gateway functionality. So I don't know if this holds true for the group in here, but according to our studies, the use of alternatives is growing in demand so much so, and growing in relevance so much so that they're actually considering the importance of alternative payment solutions along with some of your more traditional e-commerce schemes, Visa, MasterCard, etc. The potential to increase sales is the most important reason for merchants to add new payment methods. Makes sense. I don't think any surprises here. And if you look at that's 73% of those surveyed. 48 say higher sales conversions. I would almost lump those two together. Increased sales, that's the bottom line. That's what we're looking to do whenever we make adjustments to our e-commerce sites, obviously. And some quotations given on from different vertical market sectors whereby some reasoning behind the addition of additional payment methods. So the growth in alternative payment usage is driven mainly, as I stated before, by e-wallets and real-time bank transfers. Particular reason why, a lot of marketing efforts by these companies, getting out into various geographies, offering a multi-currency solution, solutions that a true either domestic and or international company can take advantage of, specific to the e-wallets. Alipay at the present time is a Chinese scheme, but very much accessible from various parts of the world. If you want to offer Alipay to your Chinese-facing merchants, you can do so. The real-time banking packages are very good. One, there's no chargebacks, or very limited risk in terms of fraud. We'll talk more about that later. But it's also a real-time payment. So, no more waiting for long settlement time frames or offline bank transfers where we rely on the consumer to initiate the payment. Okay? So conversion rates vary significantly by service type and provider. Now there's something very, very telling about this slide here, and that's the difference between offline and online. The vast majority of these payment methods that we've detailed here are in the online space, real-time, the real-time banking packages, etc., e-wallets that I just spoke of. The two at the top that you see, the Santander and the Boleto Bancario, these are offline voucher-based products, rely on the consumer to actually complete the transaction. So although extremely relevant in their particular markets, the conversion rates that you can expect to see are not near what you would expect or will see in the online space. Conversions on alternative payments also varies between merchant types. Okay, so for Ideal, one of the most popular schemes that I've talked about a couple of times now in the Netherlands, pretty much significant across all vertical markets, it depends. Are you in retail? Are you in gaming again? Well, not so much gambling, but gaming. Are you in the travel space? But you can expect to see anywhere from 77 to 89% conversions. And a lot of factors can be attributed to this. The use of iframes. Virtually all of these products require a redirect. And anytime, as we all know, a redirect takes place, there's the chance for a communication failure. Also, more steps in the payment process. The key to any solid e-commerce checkout solution is ease of use. We all know this. When you add a redirect in, the potential for failure, the additional steps that need to take place, these can all be explained for a reduction in conversion rates. An excessive horizontal or vertical scrolling, if your pages aren't set up correctly, you may redirect, the consumer may redirect to one of these online packages or e-wallets and have the checkout button at the bottom of the page and not see the checkout button, and therefore become confused and get off the site. Find one of your competition where the payment system works much more smoothly. Upfront payment instructions, inadequate facts, FAQs, and no in-session support, also contributors to a variance in conversion rates. So some of the conclusions around the market. This kind of concludes the first segment of my presentation. The market for alternatives is still growing, no doubt. Networks are rapidly entering and gaining market share. If you look at the U.S., and I'm sorry to use it as an example, but I will just because that's where I'm from. Historically, an extremely strong credit card market. The recent financial events, I think consumers got a lot more savvy, a lot smarter on how they were spending money. Recent legislation as well has contributed to this. But people are looking for convenient, cost-effective, trustworthy methods in which to pay for their goods and services. 2, a proliferation of choices means merchants need advisory support in making data-driven solutions, or decisions, Again, work with any one of the providers that you see out on the floor that offer alternative payment methods, and they can give you a good deal of advice in terms of what's relevant, what's not. It just then becomes a question on whether or not they offer it, what their reporting mechanisms are behind it, what their refund capabilities are, and support functionalities as a whole. And the same optimization analytics should be run on alternatives, as conversion is also a function of proper implementation. Again, I pointed out some of those things in terms of a difference in conversion rates. Using the same product, Company A could use that product and have a 90% conversion rate. Company B could use it and have a 75% conversion rate. It's all about the way you set up your site, work with the trusted advisor to make that as optimal as it can possibly be. So moving on, the payment type segmentation. Talk about a few classifications, some market share quickly, and process flow also very quickly, as I'm running out of time here, very quickly. Here are the key types of alternative payment methods supported. These happen to be products that we support at WorldPay through our Envoy acquisition. You can see we've classified these into e-wallets, voucher-based, prepaid and domestic cards, as well as real-time bank transfers. And you can see just by the sheer volume and numbers of these real-time banking packages, back to my earlier slides when I commented on knowing the individual market, because these are going to be relevant in various markets throughout the world. And it's your job as e-commerce experts at the merchant level, at the PSP level, at the acquiring level, to understand what those relevant payment methods are. With non-card payments, multiple types exist, each with pros and cons. I'll speak more about the real-time bank transfers. There is the redirect, right? Requires a hosting and a redirection. The pros, however, is money is in the account at the time of purchase. Very positive. Extremely limited in risk of chargebacks and authorization within a trusted environment. This is your banking package. A show of hands, how many people are banking online these days? Yeah, the vast majority of you all. And is that a trusted site for you to do business on? Of course it is. So why not do your payments via that site as well? As a consumer, you can surely see the value in these payment methods. Offline bank transfers, the time lag, I talked about that before. Direct debits, a high risk of chargeback. This is a pull payment method versus an online bank transfer or a bank transfer whereby you as a consumer are pushing money out of the account. And in an ELV or a direct debit situation, a merchant provider is pulling money out of the account. And whenever that occurs, just like a credit card, you have the risk of a reversal. And in the direct debit space, they happen to be about 2 to 3 times, maybe even 5 times higher than that in the credit card space. Something to be aware of. Okay, some more data here I won't go into for sake of time. Moving on. Here's some of the process flows, and we'll move right through these because the one thing I want to highlight here is the process flow, although different for each one of these payment methods, is virtually the same in terms of the actual flow between the consumer, the merchant, the provider, the bank, settlement of funds, reporting, etc. This happens to be for real-time banking, where you can see, again, between 2 and 4, the redirect taking place from the provider, which happens to be Envoy in this case, back to the ideal situation, into the Envoy account. Merchant Envoy settles the funds to the merchant, and a real-time notification, redirect back to the merchant site, the consumer's goods, paid for, off you go. Offline bank transfer, very similar. with the exception of the fact it's up to the consumer to go to the individual banking package if they do subscribe to online banking, or get off their couch and walk over to the bank to initiate the payment. Very important to include a unique reference number if you are offering this payment method, and really highlight that reference number on your payment checkout pages. If you don't, you run the risk of the payment being mismatched, the consumer calling you up complaining that he's paid for his goods and you haven't issued the game, the pair of jeans, whatever the case may be. And direct debit, e-wallets, much the same. You can see the same pattern of events here with all these different payment products. Cash vouchers. Unique thing about cash vouchers, you're actually printing out a cash voucher at your workstation. You've completed the purchase. Take that voucher. If it's Konbini, for instance, in Japan, you walk into a 7-Eleven, scan the voucher, pay for your goods, get a unique reference number, re-enter that reference number, and your goods or services are delivered. And mobile payments. A little bit more happening between the mobile provider and the consumer at this point with an SMS verification, part of the security network behind mobile payments. And now for about 5 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about some advanced topics, namely around fraud characteristics and how to handle refunds. Very important. You can offer all these payment methods on your site, but again, I want to reiterate the fact that you should be paying as much attention to these alternative payment methods and the intricacies around offering these payment methods as you should credit cards or anywhere else. You can optimize your payments. You can make sure that your customer's experience is that of one where he's going to be a repeat customer time and time again. So fraud rates for alternatives are typically low. There's only really a few schemes out there whereby fraud is a major problem. And I mentioned before the direct debit problem, but also just a few different products in various countries throughout the world. BPay, for instance, in Australia is one where fraud is upwards of 3%. Key alternative payment fraud characteristics, there's no regulation behind it. There's no PCI standards. There's no scheme regulations. Of course, the banks are going to have, in the real-time banking environment, they're going to have their own regulatory considerations, but those really aren't geared towards e-commerce. We haven't got there yet. This makes it hard for a PSP merchant to manage its potential financial loss. Thank goodness, the actual fraud rates behind most of these payment products are rather low. But there is a potential for loss there that needs to be managed, and is very difficult to quantify just based upon the lack of regulation in the industry. For non-settlement, some real-time banking transfers providers conduct a check of available funds before authorizing the transactions. However, these are not ring-fenced. It's very true that if I use Ideal to buy a concert ticket at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, and that transaction takes place, I get my unique reference back, my payment receipt, everything else, and then I walk to an ABN cash machine and empty out my account. Well, when they do their run payments that day at midnight, whenever they do them, guess what? You have a potential for fraud. So it's highly recommended that, especially for, and I mentioned before the use of whitelists, it's highly recommended that you develop a whitelist when looking at these different payment products, so that you know when a first-time consumer comes on, maybe you should wait to deliver those goods or services for the amount of time that it takes those funds to settle. Yeah? Okay. Phishing attacks. Some banks' payment methods don't enforce a second-factor authentication. So you get on your real-time banking package and it just says, what was the brand of the first car that you bought? And you say, well, I wish I could say Porsche, but that's certainly not the case. I still don't own one of those. But you answer the question and there's no follow-up questions. It's very easy to hack into that based upon keystrokes. So consideration there. And network attacks. Some banks' payment methods don't use a checksum tool to enable fraudsters, which enables fraudsters to manipulate the URL in that redirect. Something to be aware of as well. And fraud topologies are quite similar to the card industry. Geographic locations, looking at some of the Western African countries, the Eastern European countries, bogus emails, all these things that we've all seen in the credit card space are actually relevant in the alternative space as well. So what do you need to manage alternative payment fraud? Work with an experienced PSP that has a lot of data and working with alternative payments. Over the years, there are a number of providers, the Global Collects of the world, the Envoys of the world, the Ogons, that have been offering alternative payments for years and have a good deal of data for which you can take advantage of, and I would highly suggest that you look at that. Implement a fraud solution that is flexible enough to cope with different payment types. Okay, so if you know that you're going to have to use a redirect model, be prepared to use that redirect model, even if you're working on a merchant-based solution for credit cards, where you take on the risk and you are PCI compliant. Understand that there is a redirect necessary for the vast majority of these alternative payment products, and you need to take that into consideration when building out your e-commerce solution as it relates to fraud as well. And implement a fraud solution that allows different fraud rules to be set by the service and provides access to proprietary blacklists. Very important. So refunding alternative payment service transactions. Did you know the vast majority of these alternative payment methods do not support refunds or even capture the information to initiate a refund? Only Sofort Überweisen, Monterra, and Alipay have a solution where there's a dedicated refund solution. If not, you need to team up with a provider that has a payout function that allows you to kind of do a reverse bank transfer and pay into those merchant accounts. And we'll talk about some of the best practices. So collect refund details during the initial payment from all customers. You can do this. Great. It does, however, increase the amount of steps in the checkout process, whereby you can have a quick and easy real-time bank transfer transaction. If you don't capture those refund or customer details, chances are if there is a refund initiated, you're going to have to come back in and get that detail from the consumer, which can be a bit painful. And the main disadvantage is, again, another step in the checkout process, so you have an increased chance of people dropping off just due to frustration, among other reasons. The main advantages of not requiring those details at the moment the transaction takes place, again, less steps in the payment flow, and it only really applies to customers that want to do a refund. So if your refund rate percentages are down in the 3-4% range, well, it may be worth it for you to not ask for those payment or those customer details at the moment the transaction takes place, and just wait and address those refunds as need be. So refunds processed locally at a low cost. This is the way to do it. Again, this reverse bank transfer, this payout functionality. The people that are providing these functionalities have bank accounts on a local level, so even though you're a merchant residing in the UK and you want to do a refund in Italy, utilize a provider that has a payout functionality within the Italian schemes, and therefore can process that refund locally for a very small fee compared to a cross-border bank transfer, for instance. And that's all. I hope it was informative. I don't think we have much time for questions, maybe a couple minutes. But we at WorldPay are conveniently located right as you walk into the building by the coat check. So if you do have questions or would like some additional information with regard to what I presented today, come by to stand 306 and I'd be happy to speak with you. I hope it was informative. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like we do have a couple minutes for questions if anybody's got a burning question that they just must get out right now. We've got to take her.
Hello. Oh. Hi, my name's Vicky. I have a question for you. I have a question for you regarding the cost of setting this whole thing up. Obviously, you have the cost of setting up an acquiring bank account in each area for each different payment method. There's also the problem of branches. If you need a different merchant number for each branch you have, the costs are then fourfolds. Is there any sort of service you're aware of that can put you in touch with the acquiring banks or can minimize the costs of this at all?
Yeah, there's a number of providers out there that can work. Well, every provider should be working with you to optimize your solution, and that not only counts from an optimal payment solution, but also a fee structure that works for you and your business. And in a number of cases, I can only speak for WorldPay and some of the other providers that I've worked for, we've always done that. So if we know that you're going into a number of geographies, and we know that you're going to be offering a number of payment methods, well, setup fees are frankly not where we're going to make money. So they're really inconsequential to me. That's just my view on the situation. Others may view it differently. But that would be my advice, is to really be upfront with what your intentions are, geographies, payment methods, etc., and really push these people to provide you a solution that's going to work with you economically as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thanks. Front here.
just wanted to ask, can we get the slides for this online?
Unfortunately, this data is very proprietary at this point, so we're holding on to it very closely. This was some work that we did in some M&A activity. It's very much proprietary to WorldPay. So I'm happy to talk about any of the data with you, but we won't be passing out the slides, unfortunately.
My name is Rashid. You said there is an alternative system of payment. Is it going to replace the other payment system as well?
I don't believe that you won't see any of the, well, you may see a consolidation in terms of the number of schemes. Obviously, 230 approximately is way too many to be sustainable. So you'll see some consolidation in the e-wallet space in each one of those different categories that I pointed out before. What I don't see happening is Visa and MasterCard disappearing, for instance. They're always going to be relevant and are always going to be, well, with few exception, the major payment method used globally. Sorry?
Why it is alternative payment method? You said there is alternative payment methods.
Right.
What does it mean? How does it why it is different, and what difference it makes with other payment system? You narrate it in your system, but why you call it alternative system? Like in investment area, we have alternative investment. Means there are investment system, but we have alternative system. So is it, my question is whether this, your system is going to enhance the existing system or is going to replace the other system?
Right, so cannibalization, if you will. Yeah, right. There's always going to be cannibalization. However, it's going to be minute. If you looked at the statistics that I put up on the board there, the credit cards, for those major markets where credit cards were relevant, stayed relatively flat and even grew in some cases. You know, the PayPals of the world, the real-time banking packages of the world are really increasing as a factor of e-commerce as a whole increasing. So I don't see cannibalization as much of a concern when looking at credit card solutions as I see the addition of alternative payment methods bringing added value.